and spend a little time as you were getting ready for this. You were recognizing that we're focusing on well-being and belonging. And so this is what we want to embrace as we begin this session together and the session we have on the 17th. But just want to give much gratitude for you for taking the time, carving out the time, committing your spirits to being in this place at this time together on this journey on well-being and belonging. And I always say on becoming something different. We do that each and every day when we're in community with others, and when we're bringing that in, we are actually making the steps towards and the openness towards receiving new knowledge, receiving new passion, thoughts, new understanding in a way that really, yes, we are different as a result of their time together. So much gratitude for you choosing to be with us today. Now, we all have lots of experience on Zoom, and Shane, if you could share a little tips for people like me that sometimes are challenged on what we should be thinking about.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Shane. So some tips for Zoom. Make sure that your legs are moving underneath you. It's going to be a day-long thing. We want to get some blood flowing. But for the technical side of it, you know where your mute button is. You know where your raise your hand button on the bottom. Folks should be able to participate freely in the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me directly at Shane Rogers or Curtis or Karen as well, as I will be popping in and out. And with that, if you have any technical difficulties, again, just shoot us a message and we will get it worked out for you.
Thanks, Shane. And I guess I didn't introduce myself. It's like, okay, I'm Karen Spiller, and I'm with CAS Consulting, but very deeply engaged with Food Solutions New England in another number of different ways, and partnering here with Curtis Ogden and Shane Rogers in this session that we're having today. One of the things that I want to lift up are land acknowledgement. Am I missing something or not seeing something? Or should I be seeing something?
You got it.
Okay. So I want to do land acknowledgement. I want to do it from the spirit of Food Solutions New England, and so I would like to acknowledge it in that way. And the area that we're in New England is currently and still the home of the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Micmac, the Abenaki, the Mohegan, the Wampanoag, the Pequot, the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Nantucket, Peconic, and Pennacook, Narragansett. So many peoples among many others. And FSNE honors and respects the many indigenous people connected to this territory on which we gather. And we encourage you to learn more about who was traditionally on these lands, who is still on these lands, and really understand and seek ways to work in support of their efforts for well-being, rematuration, and reclamation. And we hope that you'll do the same wherever you are. One of the exciting, and I say exciting, things for us as well to acknowledge is this is Black History Month. We're in the third day of Black History Month. And so that's a month that's been dedicated to celebrate, to acknowledge, to learn, to lean in on the history of our Black peoples, of our communities. And on this day, I'd like to celebrate Carter G. Woodson, known as the father of Black history. This is back in 1915. He founded the Association for Study of Negro Life and History. And it was through this organization that he began pressing for, and at that point in time, he was looking for Negro History Week. And he chose the second week of February because of the two persons he felt had dramatically affected the lives of Black Americans and were born in that month. And that was Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. So through his tireless, talking about Mr. Woodson's tireless efforts, he succeeded in 1926 on this day, meaning February 1st, to bring the lives of our Black peoples into forefront, into the understanding, into the history books, into our voices, into our stories, so we can celebrate their lives, current, past, and continued contributions to all that we are here in US, and particularly when we think about our Indigenous and our Black, on how we steward the land, care for the land, and commune with the land. So please hold that close. Find ways to, throughout this entire month, find ways to learn and celebrate and be in community.
Thank you, Karen. Just letting that sink in. And again, welcome. I will introduce myself for those who don't know me, Curtis Ogden. I am coming to you from Western Massachusetts and here on the ancestral lands of the Nipmuc. And I am, in addition to spending time with Food Solutions New England over the past decade, a senior associate with the Interaction Institute for Social Change. I've had the privilege of co-facilitating with Karen for a number of years around all things related to equity in our food systems. And so we'll continue to do that today. But first wanted to just pause and give us a moment in the spirit of well-being to recognize that even in this two-dimensional way of connecting with each other, we want to make space for our full bodies. And so we have a habit of doing a grounding before every FSNE meeting that invites some aspect of ourselves that is not just these things above our shoulders. It's to acknowledge our hearts, it's to acknowledge our bodies. And so I was just going to invite us to take 3 breaths together. And each breath will be in honor of something different. The first breath will be for ourselves, just tuning into our full selves that we're bringing to today's session. The second breath will be for this community that's gathered. Some of you may know each other, some of you may not, but just know that your presence is having an impact on one another as you see these different faces and names. And so we'll take a second breath for community, and then finally a third breath for this beautiful and hurting world of ours. And I'll ask that on that third breath that we breathe out through our hearts. So the first breath will be into our bellies. A second breath will continue to expand up through our torso. A third breath will bring our breath all the way up through our hearts, and then an exhale out for our world. If you'd like to close your eyes, feel welcome, or avert your gaze a little bit, soften your gaze. But we'll just do these 3 breaths together. So inviting you just to feel your feet underneath you, whether you're seated or standing as I am, feeling your feet firmly on the floor, and inviting a first deep breath into your belly, in through your nose and out through your mouth. The breath for self, just bringing as much of you as you want to bring to this conversation. And then a second deep breath in through your belly, bringing that further up through your torso, and then taking in this entire community, this beautiful community that's gathered today, and breathing out through your mouth. And a third breath, bringing in considerations of our world, this beautiful world. Deep breath, bringing it as high as you can up into your chest cavity, into the region of your heart, and an exhale now out through your heart, breathing all the love that we feel we want to bring to our world this morning. and hoping that our conversations this morning will travel beyond this community and bring hope and healing where it's needed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane to say a little bit more about Food Solutions New England. For those of you who don't know us, we'll get into a little bit of the overview of our session and then dive in with our guests. So Shane.
Thank you, Curtis. Hi again, folks. Like I said, my name's Shane Rogers. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the communication director for Food Solutions New England. It is wonderful to see so many folks on today. I am going to give you a little bit of a background of what Food Solutions New England is. So let me get this up. All right. So Food Solutions New England is part of the Sustainability Institute at the University of New Hampshire. The Sustainability Institute focuses on climate, culture, food, and biodiversity. That is all connected through curriculum, operations, research, and engagement, and really centers around building sustainability, not only on the campus at UNH, but out into the region and into the rest of the United States and the world. As you can see, we have so many people from across the map joining us today, and our goal is to really make that connection. And Food Solutions New England Network vision envisions a powerful food movement that democratically transforms New England's food system and beyond, so that it is sustainable, just, and resilient. And for our mission, our goal is to really unite the food system community around a shared set of values. And those values are democratic empowerment, racial equity and dignity for all, sustainability and trust. And we want a movement that strengthens the ability to achieve the New England Food Vision goals, which, if you are unfamiliar, you can find those on our website at foodsolutionsne.org. And now FSNE has 4 impact areas. So not surprisingly, these impact areas all intersect with each other, but we work on network strengthening and movement weaving, which I would say this nestles right into the middle of. Equity, leadership, development, and practice, strategic narrative and communications, and visionary policy coordination. Much of our work is about connecting and convening and collaborating with folks across the region to, again, build a more just, sustainable, and equitable food system, and systems that intersect with it. And with that, I encourage everybody to check out Food Solutions New England online at foodsolutionsnewengland.ne.org, and we'll put that in the chat. And I will pass it back over, even though I can't see my agenda.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks. And certainly, as we continue this, and I mentioned this at the beginning, that well-being and belonging is our focus for the intensives, and we wanted to have focus time to really sit with it, engage in it, in both of those ways of being, because it's something that we want to anchor ourselves in when we're doing this food system work. And it also is something that we are bringing into the 21-day racial equity habit building challenge this year. As we say an anchor of being in community, an anchor in how we will engage with each other, how we will learn with each other, how we'll become something different with each other, recognizing that we all are wired for well-being and we all desire belonging. And so when we're thinking about racial equity and really striving for that, we believe that these 2 ways of being, focusing on our well-being, focusing on our belonging, and the me to we, can magically, naturally powerfully emerge and sustain. So today we're focusing on well-being, and we're looking at how we can learn from. We've got Tanya and Lotus here from the Full Frame Initiative today to really walk us through, share their knowledge, their experience, their lived experience, so that we can begin to embrace again and learn from and begin to practice. And with that, we will strengthen our relationships. We will amplify the values that Shane shared and be able to be agents. We used to use the phrase agents of change, but really, most importantly, building community that will sustain through all the trials and tribulations, all the valleys and the mountains, in that spirit of well-being and belonging. I think that is enough for today. We're going to be spending the first half, as we're doing now, with the introductions, and then we'll go right into the learnings with Lotus and Tanya, and there'll be opportunity for, as always, with our sessions with Food Solutions New England, we always like to create the sessions with opportunity for engaging with each other and challenging each other and hearing and embracing the thoughts and experiences and knowledge of each other, coming to the table in this spirit of learning. And again, I always say, and becoming something different as a result. So I think, Curtis, let's get started. I want to get started.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Thank you. Well, I am super excited to introduce our guest today. It was about 7 or 8 years ago, before system change became such a buzzword and phrase, that I was in a conversation at a few different places about systems thinking and applying that to the work of equity, social equity. And I had 3 different people in 3 different conversations, including Caesar McDowell, who's a professor of practice at MIT, John Kania, who helped to start Collective Impact, and Dorothy Allison, the author, who writes a lot about rural poverty, say, you have got to check out the Full Frame Initiative, because they are the real deal. They are doing applied system change work. And so I started to get to know them a few years ago, and have had the chance to work with Tanya, Lotus, and their colleagues, and they don't disappoint. They are amazing people, just wonderful, warm, smart, dedicated human beings who bring, I think, a really unique and vital perspective on what well-being is. That has everything to do with equity and justice and all the systems that we are focused on that need so much work in our country and beyond. I will say that FFI, as it goes by its name occasionally, the Full Frame Initiative, has a new website that I encourage you to check out. And I just wanted to read this from their website, because I hadn't really taken this in terms of the name Full Frame. But it explains that full frame is a term from documentary filmmaking. To truly show a character, the filmmaker must pull the lens all the way back from the individual and fill the frame with the environment, the relationships, the events, and the interactions that define and are defined by the character. And so that really does speak to the heart of the work that we do at FSNE, pulling back to see the broader systems and structures. So today, joining us from the Full Frame Initiative are Tanya Tucker and Lotus Yu. I'm going to say just a little bit about each of them. Their bios are wonderful and rich. I will just pull out a little bit of each of theirs. So Tanya Tucker is a national social change leader who spent her career focused on equity and creating the conditions in this country where all people can thrive. She's the Chief of National Engagement and Partnerships at the Full Frame Initiative. and is responsible for expanding and leveraging engagement opportunities, partnerships, and connections that support a broader movement to increase equitable access to well-being. She works with groundbreaking nonprofit, government, and community change makers to challenge assumptions, to shift narratives, and change structures and systems so that everyone has a fair shot at well-being. She comes with to FFI with over 25 years of experience in the nonprofit education and youth development field, supporting communities and partners to drive cross-sector systems level change so that every young person has the opportunity and support to achieve adult success. And there's much more that I could pull from the bio. So just welcome, Tanya. Great to have you with us. And Lotus Yu, also with FFI, in her role, collaborates on strategy for how to support people in shifting towards using a well-being orientation in service of sparking a movement towards a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. This includes engaging with a wide variety of partners and co-creating a plan to integrate structural shifts with capacity building. Lotus has worked with cohorts of agencies and organizations across diverse fields and also within the fields of juvenile justice, sexual and domestic violence, homelessness, and more. And prior to coming to FFI, Lotus worked for Washtenaw County in Michigan, my home state, and Karen's home state, where she managed the summer food service program for children and teens and Meals on Wheels and congregate meals for seniors. And while studying for her MSW, she worked for a prepared meals service, striving to make it more possible for people to consume locally grown food, spent time volunteering with a biodynamic CSA farm, and interned with the Washtenaw County Department of Public Health, where she supported health promotion work with people who were SNAP eligible. So just a wealth of experience between these two leaders. So glad to have you here. I'll just mention that Lotus is here in our broader New England region in Western Massachusetts, and Tanya is originally from Boston and joining us from her home now in Washington, D.C. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you just to say a bit more about your work and well-being.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Curtis. We're really happy to be with you all today. I can't think of a better way to end my week than to be in this discussion with you all. Thank you so much for this focus on well-being and belonging. And I got to tell you, over the past couple weeks or so, like, I can't think of a better focus given, what our country is going through. So really happy to be here. And I would say the really one important piece of my bio that didn't come through is that I'm an avid Patriots fan, and I'm going to trust that Tom Brady is actually retired this go round, but we never know, but we'll wait and see. So I'm going to get us started. We've got like a few slides. We want to, give you a little more about sort of FFI and the work we do and how we actually think about and define well-being, but then we're really eager to be in conversation with Karen, Curtis, and all of you. So we'll go through slides really quickly. But FFI, we're a national social change organization, and we are working to make this a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being, right? That's our North Star. That's what drives everything that we do. And what we know, because we are bombarded day in and day out with the headlines, the news stories, and certainly all of you know from the work that you do every day, is that not everybody has that fair shot. And we don't all have that fair shot because racism, sexism, homophobia, lots of other isms and othering and oppressions are actually baked in to our systems and into our country. And all that is done is created fast tracks for some to be able to access their well-being, and has greatly diminished access for others. And so our work really tries to focus where the problem is. And the problem isn't about individuals, right? This isn't about fixing individuals. It truly is about fixing, reimagining, transforming our systems and structures in this country. And so that's what we focus on. And we work across fields, across sectors, issue areas. We say we're issue agnostic in this well-being work. And we really work to put people at the center and not problems. And we do that by partnering with nonprofits, government, community, and work together to advance structural change, to challenge and shift narratives, the mental models, and to truly solve problems through a well-being orientation. And so I have to start with how we define well-being, because lots of people use that word, and I'm sure you've heard it and seen it used in lots of different ways. And we have a specific definition. So at least for our time together today, if you can hold how we look at and define well-being, which is the set of needs and experiences universally required in combination and balance to weather challenges and to have health and hope. And it just rolls off the tongue, I'm sure. But it really is about all of us, right? All of us are hardwired for well-being. And for FFI, well-being truly is a drive. It's not a destination. It's not a nice to have if you can get to it. It is what drives all of us. And it's how each of us actually lives our lives. And so that's what makes this work and this focus on well-being so exciting for me, is that this really is about all of us. Well-being really is about people and communities being whole. And so when we talk about that drive and that universal drive, what are those set of needs and experiences? And we call those the 5 domains of well-being. So I'm going to let my colleague and friend Lotus talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Tanya. So like Tanya mentioned, this is really about the drive. This is not a checkbox. This is an explanatory framework for understanding behavior, understanding our choices, our decisions. We all need social connectedness, relationships where we can give and also get, so that there is that two-way. We need a sense of belonging, and also relationships that are diverse, that bring in different experiences, that foster our growth. We need stability. We need that sense of predictability and familiarity that allows us to have some knowledge of the here, to concentrate on the here and now, and to start to think about the future. We need a buffer that prevents small things from becoming big problems. So we need it so that small obstacles don't set off big cascades of issues. We need safety. And this is probably what you think about when you think of safety, right? Just physical, emotional safety. And there's an additional layer of us being able to be our authentic selves. So true to our core identities around race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, all of those things, and not have to worry about physical and emotional harm. We all need mastery. We need to feel like we have influence in our lives, that we have some control over our fate and decisions, that we have some correlation. There's some correlation between efforts and outcomes. If I try really hard towards something, something else will happen. We all need that in our lives. And we need meaningful access to relevant resources. So things that we need, like food, shelter, transportation, all of those things without shame, without difficulty, without it being dangerous for us. And so that's just a really quick overview of what is inside the domains. There's a lot of nuance, and a lot of it builds on what definitions you already have as well. And these 5 domains of well-being are not hierarchical. What that means is we don't try to get safe before we start thinking about social connectedness or start thinking about stability. We don't worry about getting food before we worry about social connections or safety. In fact, a lot of people will give up one for the other. We're always trying to balance these 5 domains of well-being in our lives. And it's not the same for everybody, even though this is about all of us and all of us are driven for these 5 domains of well-being. There also individually experienced. So we might need different amounts in each of the domains, and it might have something to do with individual preferences, right? What Tanya needs for social connectedness might be different than me. And it's also heavily influenced by our context. And so if we think about there being all these different ways of meeting our needs for the 5 domains of well-being, there are very real oppressions that Tanya was talking about that makes it substantially more difficult for some of us to have access to well-being than others. So context really matters when we're thinking about the 5 domains of well-being and who has access, who has more access and who has less access. These are also interdependent and nonlinear. What that means is that when we make progress in one domain, there are always trade-offs. There might be trade-offs within the domain, there might be trade-offs among the domain, but they interact with each other, they're connected. And we're always trying to balance these domains that in a way that takes into account what they mean to us. So our interpretation for ourselves of what things mean. And also that takes into account the assets that we have, how we are already meeting our needs for well-being. And it says without value judgment, because this is how we are driven. And so we find ways of meeting our needs for well-being, whether that be healthy or unhealthy. And so, and in reality, even though we're constantly striving for this balance, the way our systems are set up often forces unsustainable trade-offs. Because when we're focused on just one goal or challenge, the way our systems are set up, that is often what happens. Then we end up coming up with solutions that undermine other areas that can be forced by those structures. So a couple examples that come to mind. One is thinking about getting benefits. A lot of times people are forced to give up a lot of data to give benefits. And that has implications for things like safety, or if you're undocumented, or for anybody who's trying not to be found or not having identifying information out there. It makes me think about restrictions placed on public assistance for food. Already, there's so much around what you can buy and can't buy. And some states are even trying to restrict that even more, where you can only buy wheat bread or you can only buy brown rice. And so what that means is that people in poverty, people who are disproportionately people of color, disproportionately experiencing oppressions in our society, are held to the standard where there's no choice, right? And so when we think about well-being, we're thinking about we should all be able to have the opportunity to make these choices for ourselves, be able to feel like we have influence over our lives. And there are always these trade-offs, no matter what comes with that. And when we think about systemic inequities, thinking about who gets to grow the food, who owns the land, that has tremendous implications for well-being, for who gets to have access to well-being and who has less access to well-being.
So Curtis mentioned in sort of his intro of us and FFI that we do our work through systems change, and certainly we can't get to that fair shot without looking at this work through a systems change lens. And for us, that really is about how do we alter or transform how people and structures are linked, how they function, and how they influence one another. And really what that means is we've got to change how we see each other. And so, oftentimes we want to just focus in on, one area as the fix. And so I think, early in our work, a lot of people came to us, if you could just train and build the capacity of our frontline workers, right? Just focus on the practice. And if they just change how they do their work, that'll make us more well-being aligned. Certainly important, but if that's not buttressed and supported, right, by structure, by policy, you can change practice all day, and that's not going to get you to where you want to be. So an important piece, but not the entire piece. We've got to look at these sort of entrenched policies, and that's, capital P and lowercase p policies, and the structures that are in place to change those. And then that bigger circle that you see in the middle, culture, which is probably the hardest nut to crack, if you will, right? That's where really our beliefs and the stories we tell and the narratives that we believe, that's the piece that also has to change to support the systemic lens. And all of that we have to pay attention to, right? The mental models that are dominant and that people have. You cannot discount context in history for what you're trying to do. And then certainly relationships and power. So much of becoming well-being aligned requires us to rethink power and to shift power. And so, our work that we do, there's not a quick fix to say, press this button and you and your work and your system can become, well-being aligned. But we know, and the way we work is that there are committed people inside systems who know that the same old isn't working, and have the imagination and the will and the influence to change that. And folks in community who also want to work together so that there's not more harm done to them, their families, and their communities. And so working both inside and outside those systems to bring about that fair shot is what we're all about.
So going to drop into the chat. We did a little overlay of well-being and food systems. And so it's a document, feel free to check it out.
Thank you, Lotus, and thank you, Tanya. The first time again I heard this framing and this definition of well-being, it was just kind of blew me away. It resonated so deeply, and some of you have shared this in the chat, right? Kristen talking about the difference between how we typically define health and well-being, especially in systems of oppression. People talking already about how this definition of well-being makes you think more holistically, right? About our work in food systems. And also interesting that Lily, hello, Lily, nice to see you here. This conversation around wellness and self-care, right, which can become so individualized, at least in I think so much of many of our perspectives, right, that it's the, if you have wellness, it's because of your individual choices as opposed to what structurally supports you, and so on and so forth. So and resonance from others sharing here in the chat. So, for those of you who have not shared, you will have a chance to jump in with small groups in about another 12 minutes or so. Karen and I wanted to ask a couple of questions and give you all a chance to connect a little bit more deeply. And feel free to share in the chat what else may be resonating with you in terms of your work in food and related systems. But Karen, you want to jump in with a question for our guests?
I would, because we're looking at this in our work, and would love it if you could share a few examples of where well-being is being lifted up as a core design principle, core way of being in different places, different systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the good thing for us is that there isn't just one system that has to change, and like that's all we do, right? Every system this applies to. And so our work really has spanned courts and city government, human services, just starting to get into infrastructure and the built-in environment, right? Well-being touches everything. We are working, one example is that we're actually working with the city of New London, Connecticut. And they started with a big vision of like, all right, we want to make this New London a city where everybody has a fair shot, and created sort of a big vision statement, right, of what that could look like and what that could mean. And then looked at like, all right, we have this timely opportunity with our city getting an influx of ARPA dollars, which many cities and states did. How can we take those funds and make that well-being aligned, right? Not just sort of get them out the door and do the same old and get the same results, but we could actually make that ARPA process one that's well-being oriented, that has equity and community at the center, that is really looking at, working with community, not for community. And so that's what we've been helping them do over the past year and a half, as they've been distributing their ARPA funds, really aligned in a more well-being way, and then working with those grantees to share and learn from each other, and to actually surface what the systemic issues are that are getting in the way, so that then the city government can say like, okay, how do we remove those structural barriers? And as part of that work, I think, sort of food and food justice has been at the center in New London, and we've been working with their meal center, and they're really looking at how do we have the folks that we serve also making decisions about the program. And we've been working with an organization, Fresh New London, that's about food justice and working with young people, but really looking at the systemic barriers and starting with what matters to people. So how do we not just like grow food and, distribute food, but how do we grow the food that people actually want? Right. And that means something to them and their culture and their families. So that's some sort of like comprehensive work that we're doing with New London, with sort of this ARPA pot of money as a start, but certainly not the end.
Another
Thanks.
example that is really connected around bringing this as a common language between different agencies and organizations. And what I find really compelling about using this well-being lens is that it's not a framework for people in poverty, people in homelessness. It's really about humans and what it is that makes us all tick. And when we are able to use this lens as a common language across agencies, it allows for greater progress. And so some of the work, for example, that we've been doing with the juvenile justice system in Missouri, working with their Division of Youth Services, and then that ultimately spread to the St. Louis City and County Courts, and then to Children's Division, because it was like, oh, this other agency is doing it. Let's try to understand that language too, and this makes sense. And what that can do is it creates an experience for the people who are going through the systems that feels more aligned. It also helps the staff who sometimes move between systems feel more aligned. And a lot of that was really around what Tanya was saying about what matters to you. So in our work, for example, at the St. Louis County Court, they were shifting from deciding what happens for treatment for whatever happens next with the youth, to involving youth in that decision. Like, what matters to you? What's important for you? And starting with that conversation. And yes, this example is specific to the juvenile justice system. And that's a way of starting the conversation that is relevant in multiple fields and multiple systems, because it's about understanding well-being and what drives us all.
Thanks, Lotus.
Yeah. I'll also drop into the chat. There's a map of examples that are aligned with the Wellbeing Blueprint that we'll be talking about, and the Wellbeing design principles that we'll be talking about that might be important, useful and interesting to you. And feel free to send us examples, because we're just trying to capture all the good work that's out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm
Keep
sure.
it coming. Keep it coming.
I'm sure so many of you, Lotus mentioned this map, and we'd love to have many of you represented on this map, because whether or not you're actually using the language of well-being, I am certain that so much of the work you're doing is aligned and speaks to well-being, principles. So it's really not important for us that there be this like indoctrination of we've got to use the words that we use and you've got to describe it exactly how we describe it. But does it align, right, with the concept and with the principles? And that's what's more important, to us. So I know we'd love to amplify the work that you all are doing.
Yeah, this framework actually comes from looking at what seems to be working out there in the field. And so that means it's happening. It's just an articulation of it. And it would be great to learn the really neat stuff that you're doing. And I'm sure others in the community would love to know too.
Yes, and there's a wonderful, a story around the founder of the Full Frame Initiative, Katja Fels-Smith, who's in our New England region as well, in Western Massachusetts, and her experiences around sexual abuse, domestic violence, and what was not working, and seeing what clearly would work or was working in instances, very much in the spirit of what Tanya and Lotus are lifting up. I wanted to ask just one other question, and then we will invite people into some small group breakouts to meet each other and just digest and process a little bit of this framing around well-being and what's resonating and how it might apply to your work. Again, you'll have two opportunities to do that this morning. I'm curious. I was able to join you two along with 100 and some other people from around the country in December at the Wellbeing Summit in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we were applying these principles in different domains. And I'm just curious, as you hear these stories of people trying to integrate well-being into different systems and sectors, are there one or two common challenges you're hearing across sectors, whether we're talking about the built environment, or we're talking about climate, or we're talking about democracy, or we're talking about, health and human services? What are some of the big challenges coming up, and how are people thinking about those challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I take us back to sort of that systems level graphic. And when you hit up against the culture piece, right? Like practice, people understand, right? You can give me some tools to change how I, connect with and engage, with participants and the people that interact with my system or program. And even, sort of policy and the structure piece is kind of a concrete thing. When you hit against the culture piece and the beliefs people have, however well intentioned, that really takes time, and also often takes time for that to settle in for folks, right? Because people want to believe, right, that they're doing the best work that they can do, and that, they're personally not causing any harm. And what we always say that is, this isn't about good people and bad people. It really is the way our systems are designed and the defaults in those systems. We all get caught up in it. So it's not about Curtis being bad, Tanya being good, but that culture piece and trying to really get at how we see each other, the stories we believe and have been told about, each other, that then drive our policies and structures and our processes. That's the hardest piece, I think, folks have.
I think along those lines, at a personal level, it's about really changing the narratives that people have about each other, that we have about ourselves. And it's hard because it requires, at systems and structures level, the people in those decision-making places to realize and confront the reality that they may not be the ones who know best for the folks who are coming into systems. And for those who are doing the work, it can be really hard because a lot of this shift in narrative and shift in the way of doing things is also about what was just happening, maybe not being the best for people, and maybe also causing harm. And so that can be a really hard reality for people to, I mean, when we think about well-being for staff or the people doing the work, I mean, what does that do to our sense of mastery and what we're maybe proud of? And, you know, so that's another level where there is well-being, different people's well-being pushing up against each other. And it really requires, you know, in those moments of frustration, in those moments of disagreement or not understanding what's going on, to like be able to slow down and to be able to ask hard questions around like, why am I thinking this? What is it that is that I'm assuming about somebody? And what is really driving this behavior? And that can be really difficult when emotions are running high and decisions are being made, and there's a lot of pressure to make decisions.
And one just quick thing, Curtis, because I know you want to get to the breakouts, but you cannot sort of lean into well-being and become well-being aligned without centering community, centering, you know, people. And our notion of how we engage and partner with community isn't actually centering community. We actually sort of lead with our own, you know, goals and objectives, and maybe we're getting input or feedback and reaction. But what well-being requires is that there's a true and authentic partnership, right? And that community is engaged in decision making, in defining what the problem actually is, and coming up with the solution and shifting and sharing that power. And that our systems just aren't set up to do that really well. So that's also becomes a challenge area, I think, that we hear and see a lot.
Thank you both. I mean, hearing clearly that this work it's not for the faint of heart. It is a full-bodied experience. This is not just an intellectual exercise, and it really requires that deep trust and partnership that people have to be ready to lean into. Think about Rianne Eisler's work comparing, you know, dominator culture, which seems like it's so widespread in our systems, versus partnership culture. It really is quite a shift, quite a transformation. So we do want to move people, invite you into some small group breakouts. This is, we find, a really rich time for you to meet people, different parts of the country, different systems. And so we have a suggested question that we're putting in the chat here, which is, what reactions are you having to the conversation so far? Any insights or ahas? And also, what questions do you have? We'd like to field some questions when you come back. You have 20 minutes for this conversation. Certainly introduce yourselves to one another. This is all part of our commitment to continuing to weave this network within and beyond the region. So opening rooms now. You should be in a room with 3 or 4 other people, 20 minutes for this, and we'll see you when you're back.